Bloom wiring. We're going to use the sunflower that you have as an example and finish up the wiring of the blooms and its configuration. On the screen, I have the plant image, stage 3 plant image, which actually has the bloom components in it. And then I also have the database entry for the sunflower sprout item. So let's start with the prefab. In here, we have bloom 1, bloom 2, bloom 3. And we know that bloom 1 starts first, it then progresses to bloom 2, which then progresses to bloom 3. Bloom 2 and 3 are what we'll call dependent blooms, which means that they are only activated when the previous stage goes away. So let's do the configuration we need. First, select the plant image itself, and then in here, you'll see there's a bloom stages area right here. This array is empty currently, so let's add 3 entries to it and expand it. This is the piece of accounting we need to tell the code which blooms correspond to which stage. So element 0 here is bloom 1. So drag in that item to this array. We'll do it for number 2, and we'll do it for number 3. So now we have the 3 stages and the blooms that they correspond to. And then each of these stages also needs an ID, so we can wire it into the database itself. So click New on each of these, and then I think we're good for the prefab. So each stage has an ID, and each stage has one or more images that are turned on or off when that stage is activated or deactivated. So let's turn to the database entry for the sunflower and go down to the blooms section here. This again is an array. We want the same number in here, so we want 3 elements to that array. Element 0 is going to be the first stage, element 1 is the second, and element 2 is the third. Let's just start wiring from the top to the bottom. So element 0 is the initial bud. We want its ID to be the same as the bloom stage ID over here, right? So this ID goes into this spot here. So we'll copy this, we'll paste it into this ID here. So that ties the database to the first stage in the prefab. Now we say this, leave off the require healthy plant. This is ignored, I think, by the code at this point. We turn that off. Is dependent. This is not a dependent bloom. This kind of starts on its own. And the others will be tagged as dependent because they are progressions and triggered by the previous one going away. So blooms every day. So this is the base number of days that will pass before the initial bud shows up. So let's just say this sunflower will bloom every 5 to 7 days. That bud will last 2 to 3 days before it progresses on to the next stage. And that's what this is here. Bloom progression. What is activated when this bud goes away? And what is going to be activated is the second stage. So we copy element 1's ID and we paste it into here. So that tells us that after this bloom goes away, it's going to look for bloom with this ID and turn that on. That'll be this element down here. While we're here, we have that ID, so let's tag element 1 with that same ID. So this one here leads to this one here. The last pieces to wire up in this bloom section per stage would be these effects. We want to turn on these effects, and we want to drag in the default effects for blooms. So over here in prefabs, effects, bloom effects, you see there's a bunch of custom effects here for some of the plants. And then there's also a default entry and a default drop entry. So this bloom effect default goes into the bloom effect field here, and then this bloom effect drop default goes into the default drop area right here. So that's it for the stage. Basically the ID, days it lasts, the days that it takes to come on, the days that it will persist, and then where it goes after that. So let's wire up the next stage. We've already put the ID in. We'll give this a name, stage 2. We can actually give the first one a stage 1 name as well. This is so stage 2, it has this ID, which corresponds to the prefab, and is also linked to the first stage as being activated when the first stage is done. So it means that this is a dependent bloom. When it's a dependent bloom, the blooms every day section is ignored because it's automatically triggered by the previous one finishing. But it does have a bloom duration. So the second stage of the sunflower, let's just say again, lasts 2 to 3 days before progressing on to the final large open sunflower. And that's what this is here. The bloom progression, what is to be activated when this is done? It will be element 2, which is the final stage. So we copied that ID from the prefab. We paste it in here, and it will also paste it into the final stage here, because this is stage 3. Going back up to stage 2 here, bloom progression is filled in, so we know it's going to activate stage 3. The bloom effects we turn on as well, and we drag those same default effects into this section here, and that's done. So stage 2 as an ID is a dependent, so it's activated by stage 1. It'll last 2 to 3 days, and when it's done, it'll activate stage 3, which has the same ID, and then it has default drop and default blooming effects. Stage 3, the final stage, has its ID already, which corresponds to the prefab, and it's activated by stage 2. It is also dependent, so we can ignore the blooms every days. The bloom duration, how long will the big sunflower last? Let's give the player a nice show, I guess, of 7 to maybe 10 days, whatever we decide that the big sunflower should last. It does not have a bloom progression. Nothing comes after it, so this goes back. This is just empty. And then the bloom effects are the defaults again, and we activate those. And then that is the wiring for the blooms for the plant. And we should be good to go.